Okay, so how many people know that in Northwest Ohio, we're going to see an eclipse here in about, 5 months? Excited about that, right? So here's a question for you. Do you guys know how the sun cuts, or the moon, how the moon cuts its hair? Eclipse it. Eclipse it. Welcome to another Fridays at Findlay. We're very glad that you're here. We have a wonderful presentation for you. We're very excited to get this started. My name is Ken McIntyre. For those I haven't met yet, the newly minted VP here at University Advancement, filling in the shoes of a wonderful predecessor, Dr. Marcialato. I am going to introduce to you right now our student who's going to give us a little prayer invocation, Lola Thompson, early childhood education, junior class of 2015, and resident advisor at the University of Findlay. Please, Lola.
Well, good morning, everyone. Sorry, I don't have any funny jokes to follow up with that. That was, really starting us off strong tonight. But as he introduced, my name is Lola Thompson. I'm a junior here at Findlay in the Early Childhood program. And I was asked today before I pray to also just share a little bit about why I chose to come to Findlay in the first place when I was a senior in high school. And in all honesty, I came here because I heard it was a fantastic physical therapy program. And if you haven't connected the pieces, I am no longer going for a physical therapy program. So needless to say, when I was a freshman and deciding to change my major, that seems like a really big deal of, wow, I'm not going to stay here for the reasons I initially came. I was also planning to run track, and I am also no longer running track. So when I was asked the question of why I chose to come to UF, I actually decided to twist it a little bit and answer instead why I chose to stay at UF when all the reasons I decided to come completely changed that freshman year. So a lot of times when people switch their major, there's the decision of whether they want to pick a different school, and that is exactly what my mom asked me when I was calling her to inform her that at the end of freshman year, chemistry really kicked my butt, and I no longer wanted to take chemistry. So she asked if I was planning to stay or transfer, and spoiler alert, you guys can obviously tell I'm here, so I chose to stay. And it was for reasons I never would have anticipated when I first moved to college. And for one, this life, when you come to college as a freshman, it becomes your whole life, which I don't think people realize. You live here, you eat here, you have a job on campus, you're just here 24/7. And when I stepped onto campus freshman year, I truly found community here that took me in. I got really involved in a number of things, especially campus ministries, as well as I'm now a resident assistant. And both areas connected me with individuals who took me in and made me feel really cared for and a sense of belonging. So when my mom asked me if I was transferring, the thought honestly hadn't even crossed my mind because I felt so connected to campus when I first came. And the community here really took me in, and in the cheesiest way possible, it did really make it feel like a family away from home. So here I am finishing up my junior year, which is really exciting, and I have really enjoyed my experience here so far. So thank you all for listening a little bit of my story. So I'm going to take time today to pray over us all, and if you would all bow your heads with me as we pray. So Heavenly Father, I thank you for the love you have for us and the presence here on campus. You have a desire for community that you so graciously gave to many of us sitting in this room. And we praise you that we do belong here and we can join together at times like these to meet new people and enjoy company with old friends. Lord, I pray over the food that we have eaten, and I ask that it nourishes our bodies through today, and it gives us the energy to do what we need to do. And I pray over the presentation that it would be insightful and a great opportunity to learn more about our area and all the blessings you have given us and all that we can do here together. And in your name I pray, amen.
Thank you so much, Lola. It's great to be back on campus with you all. I'm Marcia Sloan-Latta, and I know we have a nice mix of individuals here this morning from the community, some faculty, staff, and from some surrounding communities. So whether you come here every single day or whether this is the first time you have been on campus in a while or ever, we are delighted that you chose to spend your morning with us and to hear Dr. Adam Levine share some insights on the field of art and specifically the world of the Toledo Museum of Art and its impact on the region, and some plans he has for the future. So a little bit about Adam. I'll just share a few highlights. His biography, of course, is quite lengthy, but I'm just going to pick a few things out here.
Whatever you think.
So he currently holds the Edward Drummond and Florence Scott Libbey Director of the Toledo Museum of Art role. He is also a scholar of ancient art, and we're going to talk a little bit about that here in a moment. I have had the good fortune of knowing Adam for at least a dozen years, maybe even a little beyond that, and first got to know him when he joined Toledo Museum of Art in 2012 as the Andrew Mellon Fellow there, a 2-year postdoc program. And he was at Toledo Museum of Art for about 6 years, at that point reporting to Dr. Brian Kennedy, and played a major role in developing the museum's first campus master plan, and also shared oversight of the budget and the 250 employees. So if you've always wondered how many people work at Toledo Museum of Art, and I think that's really quite an impressive number in order to do all the things.
We wish it were double.
That,
people at the University of Findlay all seem to have multiple titles. It's the same with the Toledo Museum of Art.
So a little bit about his further background. So when he left the Toledo Museum of Art at that time, he became the George W. and Kathleen I. Gibbs Director and Chief Executive Officer of the Cummer Museum of Art and Gardens in Jacksonville, Florida. Has anyone ever visited that museum? There we go.
2.
Okay, 2. Well, probably almost as well known for the gardens as the actual art collection. Would I be correct?
Yeah, so it is 3 gardens on the National Register by incredibly significant landscape architects. Thomas Meehan, a Philadelphia landscape architect of the early 20th century, Ellen Biddle Shipman of the middle to mid-20th century, probably the great female landscape architect in history, and the best American landscape architect at the time, and then the Olmsted brothers, who I think most people know by name. So incredible gardens. The best sculpture was this 800-year-old oak tree in one of the gardens. It was a really, really special place. But we can talk more about that.
So, okay, so put Jacksonville on your list.
Absolutely.
And visit the museum and gardens there. So from an education standpoint, Adam went to Dartmouth College for his undergraduate, where he graduated summa cum laude and Phi Beta Kappa from Dartmouth, where he majored in, listen to this because this plays an important role in understanding Adam and what he's doing at TMA.
Or an important role in the therapy that I'm going to need later in life, right?
But he majored in anthropology, art history, and mathematics and social science. So isn't that an interesting blend? And went on as a Rhodes Scholar at University of Oxford, where he received his master's degree with distinction and his Doctor of Philosophy in the history of art. He has, of course, published widely on topics ranging from ancient art and interpretive strategies to museum and management practices. Now, how many of you were here for the AI talk in October? Okay, several of you, great. So this is interesting, combining his interest in mathematics and art. He co-founded Art Research Technologies in 2009, a data and research company that has since gained a following in the commercial art world. So he's an entrepreneur in addition to this. So, and we're going to talk a little bit on how AI may impact the art world. So, so that's a little bit about Adam's background. We have several questions I've come up with that I'll start off with, and then we'll allow time, of course, for all of you to ask questions as well. So So Adam, first question I have is, before we begin discussing TMA collection, et cetera, but can you please share, why did you choose the field of arts administration? Your background could have taken you a whole lot of directions.
Sure.
So why this field?
Thank you for the question, Marcia. Thank you for having me. Of course, thank you to the university for having me. It's wonderful to be with all of you, but I'm here because Marcia asked. And as any of you who know Marcia knows, one does what Marcia asks. So really, really delighted to be here, and thanks for giving me the opportunity. I will tell you that one doesn't become a museum administrator for mornings like this. So let me begin, for those of you who have seen the news, by saying you might have seen a headline saying that there was a burglary attempt at the Toledo Museum of Art. There was not. So it's actually more frustrating that there wasn't in some ways, because how the media decided to cover it as a burglary. There was a drunk driver who got into an accident on the museum's campus. We have 37 acres. We are the second largest landholder in downtown Toledo behind the county. We actually own more land than the city does. So it's not the first time that there's been an accident on our campus, but in this particular instance, it became a burglary attempt. A burglary attempt. It was not a burglary attempt, right? Please tweet that. No burglary attempt at the Toledo Museum of Art. If there were, I wouldn't be sitting up here. So of course, administration brings with it all of those fun curveballs, right? You never have a day that operates exactly like you think it would. But the reason so I guess there are two parts to that answer, Marcia. So the first is, all of our lives only look linear in retrospect, right? A press release makes everything look like it happened exactly as it should have. But of course, there were all sorts of gyrations along the way. And you're right, it did not have to be thus. But ultimately, I made the decision to pursue, and I was pretty clear-sighted about it. I wanted to, at the point I made the decision definitively, pursue a career in museum administration, because I believe museums are important. And we can unpack the whys and wherefores of that. But museums can't actually remain relevant and sustainable if they're managed poorly. And no one has ever said, oh, you want a paragon of excellence, look at a nonprofit, generally speaking. So museums, like many nonprofits, face pressures. Nonprofits are subject to what's called cost disease, right? Our costs go up, but there are no real efficiencies in delivering our product that allow us to match those costs. And we don't have products, our products are public goods, that we can price according to our input cost increases. So actually, nonprofits need really good management. And I'm an art historian, I care deeply about the subject matter, I have a curatorial background, but the reason I decided to go the administrative route is because I can foresee ongoing headwinds, particularly for institutions that are private and free, which is the dumbest business model. Very good for the community, but not a great business model. But if you think that's important, then you have to sort of sharpen your pencil on the management side, the administrative side, and that's ultimately why I went that route. And I do believe art museums should be free. That is a philosophical principle that wherever I go, museums will be free. The Cummer Museum of Art and Gardens is not free, but I put in place a plan to get us to free. And my successor is doing a great job matriculating down that path.
So that actually is a question that I had down. So let's explore that, because I'm sure, like all of you, when traveling to any city, I always want to know what are the top museums, regardless of subject matter. What are the top museums in this city, or location, so that I can be sure I visit it or them. And it is very rare that a museum is completely free to enter. So particularly a museum with the quality of collection of TMA. So how did that happen?
Yeah, so it is vanishingly rare. Where you find most free museums in the United States are on university campuses. There are other museums that are free. but they usually have large subsidies from a local government entity. So I said something before, I really want to underscore it because I am always shocked. It's not on you, it's on us. I am always shocked how few people realize the Toledo Museum of Art receives no government support. I want to repeat, the Toledo Museum of Art receives $0 in city money, county money, state money, or federal money, apart from competitive grants. So we will go through the state capital budget process, and hopefully we will get some money for our plumbing. Unless someone here would like to name our plumbing, we'd be delighted. The bathrooms or something everyone wants their name on. We apply for, we receive National Endowment of the Humanities grants, National Endowment of the Arts grants, but those are repackaged federal monies through competitive processes. There are no line item appropriations at any level of government that support the Toledo Museum of Art. There are no levies that support the Toledo Museum of Art. We have incredible cultural infrastructure in Northwest Ohio. You pay for most of it when you brush your teeth. The Toledo Museum of Art costs nothing to you unless you choose to support us. And that is in the founding ethos. So one of the things that we also don't do a great job of talking about is we talk about the Toledo Museum of Art as being founded by Edward Drummond and Florence Scott Libbey, which is not true. They are the most important founders of a group of people who founded the museum. There were 7 incorporators for the Toledo Museum of Art, including a lawyer, right? Always good to have one of those around so you don't make mistakes. A lawyer, an architect, another industrialist, the Secors, right? So James Secor, Arthur Secor, architect, artist, actually 2 artists, lawyer, Edward Drummond Libbey, James Secor, and Florence Scott Libbey. So an incredible assortment of people. Most of whom actually lived in the neighborhood around the museum, not the Old West End, because I-75, believe it or not, has only been there for half of the museum's history. So more of the founders lived behind the museum than lived in front of the museum, which is sort of an interesting point to think about the Old West End existing in 360 degrees, right? There was no Englewood, there was no Junction. It was all that, it was all the West End, and only became the Old West End after people kept moving west. So Toledo Museum of Art was founded by this group. And as many of you will know, when it was founded, the Edward Drummond Libbey put $100,000 in early 20th century money into a matching campaign. And the city met the charge, and kids brought their pennies into their school classrooms and the now infamous penny drive. So from the very beginning, the museum was conceived of as a space for the entire community, and through its original funding apparatus, bought the community into the idea that this institution was for them. So now to answer your question more directly, the other way that the fact that the Libbey Trust bequest and Edward Drummond and Florence Scott Libbey's support is sometimes overstated is I think there's a general perception that the museum is rich, even though the draw from our endowment is vastly less than the levies that support other institutions in Northwest Ohio. What we get out of our endowment to support our operations is a fraction of what supports other institutions. And they're all great, and you should support those, but it's a very different model, right? We don't put that on you. So in Edward Drummond Libbey's will, he said, the Toledo Museum of Art, if they accept the proceeds from my bequest, which was appended with Florence Scott Libbey's, must remain free to the public 2 days a week. Not every day, only 2 days a week. And while that trust is very large, right, it's about $85 million, our endowment, which has been raised from people without the last name Libbey, is 3 times larger. So just as with the penny drive, so there's this perception that the museum runs off of Libbey funds. Quite to the contrary, the Toledo Museum of Art operates off of the generosity of Northwest Ohio, period, full stop. So this community is what makes this place run. And the board knows that we only have to be free receiving Libbey monies 2 days a week, but 13 times in our institution's history, because it's good to periodically revisit things. It's just a good governance best practice. The board has reaffirmed that we think it is important as a philosophical matter to be for all the people of Northwest Ohio, to be as accessible as possible to be free. So it is something that we continuously reaffirm. It is not a stricture which is imposed on us. So it is very, very rare. There are vanishingly few museums that are free, almost none that are private as well. Certainly, once you include international museums, the British Museum is free, but totally government funded. The denominator swells, the numerator remains just as small. We really are a unicorn, and we are only a unicorn because of the support of people not named Edward Drummond and Florence Libbey.
So thanks for sharing that. And of course, I will briefly use that as a segue to say, for those of you who are not from Findlay, you may or may not be aware that our Mazza Museum here on campus also exists because of the generosity of many people in this room and others, and is also free for you to visit. So I want to be sure to say thank you to the donors who helped to keep it that way. And for those of you who have not visited it, Ben, is it open shortly, starting at 9 today? Noon, starting at noon today.
But you should all come back because it's a remarkable place and Ben does a terrific job. And anyone who supports culture anywhere deserves a thank you. Keeping things free, even if it doesn't induce a visit, I mean, it always does at the margin, but even if it doesn't induce a visit, it also sends a signal about how you value accessibility. So I cannot underscore how important that is as a philosophical point.
And we're blessed, very blessed in Northwest Ohio to have that. So your background, when I mentioned what all of you studied, you have antiquities as part of your background, ancient art. What do you say to people who say, well, that's all that old stuff that happened hundreds or thousands of years ago? How is it relevant to our world today? Mm-hmm. And why should people care about that?
That is a softball for me.
Yeah,
Thank you, Marcia.
Right. I was just going to say, I'm going to do time restraint on that. So maybe in about 3 minutes, you can answer.
I can do that in 3 minutes or less.
Because otherwise, I'm sure you could take that one for 3 hours.
I will keep it tight. But I will also address one part of the previous question and tie the two together, which is, we are very rare in being free. We're even more rare in being private, and we are unique in that we are free, totally private, and have this institution with the quality of work that we do. So the best way to think about that, which will parlay into antiquities, is in the 1960s, the best 8 museums in North America, and ergo in the Americas, got together to benchmark against each other. They created a group in which the director and the board chair, because you become a board chair of a museum or a university because you've been very successful in a lot of walks of life. It doesn't mean you know anything about a museum or higher education. So it's really good to have board chair colleagues that you can benchmark against who will have had varying tenures. So those top 8 museums in the United States were the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York, the Museum of Modern Art in New York, the Los Angeles County Museum of Art in LA, the Art Institute of Chicago, the Philadelphia Museum of Art, the Museum of Fine Arts in Boston, Cleveland, and Toledo. The National Gallery in DC wasn't added until the 1980s. The Museum of Fine Arts in Houston wasn't added until the early 2000s. The Getty has not been admitted because it's not considered to be good enough in terms of its collection. So giving a sense of how great this institution is. And one of its strengths are the antiquities, which is what drew me there. So the simple answer to the question is that, I am obviously a millennial. I know you're shocked, so I always, but as a historian, I know that there are 2 laws of history that are always true, and that might sound like a really remarkable thing or ridiculous thing, but it is true. The first law of history is there's never been a generation in the history of the world that didn't think it knew everything. And the other law is there's never been a generation in the history of the world that didn't think the generation before it knew absolutely nothing. So actually having a little bit of humility about the certainty that we feel about how right we are about everything is a healthy thing. And nothing makes that lesson clearer than history, right? We are following every day the on-again, off-again ceasefire, or not, right, in the Middle East. That has historical precedent. Vladimir Putin, for a decade before invading the Crimea, right, not this invasion, the previous invasion, had been funding archaeological investigations in the search of Russian cultural heritage in the Crimean Peninsula to validate his claim, which you saw in the media as soon as he invaded Russia, that the Ukraine is actually Russian, right? So using archaeology to validate the current moment. All of our arguments about identity are fundamentally grounded in history. And objects are an important part, material culture are an important part of how we construct those narratives. So actually, it's the old stuff that is the true reflection of how these narratives actually were traced, which is quite different from the interpretation of those narratives today in some instances. So the job of someone who's focused on ancient material is actually to help reconstruct the complexity of those narratives rather than to sort of wedge them in to the modern or contemporary interpretations of things. So I think that if you think identity is important and you think that it is a prevailing force in dialogues of the 21st century, then you have to acknowledge that the historical inputs to identity formation are fundamental, and ancient material culture, just like ancient text, is a huge part of understanding how and where those identities come from and challenging some of those narratives that aren't necessarily grounded in history.
Thank you. So let's go.
Was that 3 minutes? It was a little bit longer. Okay, I'm
No,
sorry.
it was a great insight description. So let's go from ancient past to current and future. How do you see AI changing, if you see it changing, the field of art and museums?
Yeah, well, it will. I mean, it already has. I've asked every leader at the Toledo Museum of Art to use ChatGPT every day for something. We are reinstalling our whole collection. So for the first time in 40 years, we're reconsidering where every work of art goes, right? You go into the museum and you're used to seeing things in certain places. It always hasn't been that way, and that narrative is actually a little bit stale. We'll get to that. So that includes the glass pavilion. So one of the things we did is we sent our curators to Japan all together to look at all the buildings that Sejima Nishizawa Architecture Associate Sana, the architect, had built in Japan, because there's some really interesting analogs for our building there. And they spent, a month, not continuously, on and off doing research, coming up with their itinerary. This was several months ago. And I told our director of collections and curatorial affairs, I said, just go to ChatGPT and say, we have 6 curators going to Japan. We're interested in seeing Sana buildings. We want to minimize the amount of time that we spend on trains. We're going from these dates. Give us an itinerary. And it basically replicated their itinerary in 45 seconds. So it's already affecting us operationally. But in terms of the content, artists are always the folks who adopt technology first. They're not the ones who systematize it, but they're the ones who adopt technology first. So AI has been being used in art since the 60s. We're now just talking about generative AI's capacity because it has reached a level of maturity that affects us in society broadly. But artists have been thinking about what are the ethics of AI? How does this intersect with our practice? We just closed an installation in which the artist medium is AI. She used a generative adversarial network to train, she trained a generative adversarial network to replicate Northwest Ohio bird calls. And she created this immersive installation. It was called Machine Auguries, in which you hear an AI, so machine-generated bird call, and then a recorded bird call from the Black Swan Birds Observatory, and a call and response that simulates the dawn chorus. And over 13 minutes, you hear the algorithm go from something which sounds like a machine to a perfect replication that not even Ken Kaufman, the great birder of our region, could differentiate. So artists are going to play around with artificial intelligence. It's going to have huge effects, not just on, in that case, sonic and immersive art, but even today, we are launching our first Web3 blockchain-based project, and part of it includes generative art. It includes artists who are using algorithms to produce recombinations, think of them as digital collages, using artificial intelligence as the engine to generate the collages. So artists are experimenting. It's not all going to be good, but it's all going to be interesting. And over time, artists will figure out methodologies, a canon will form, and institutions like ours have a role to play in helping assess what the highest quality things of any genre of art are. That will include art that engages AI.
It's also very STEAM-oriented.
Hugely.
And relevant. I see Dr. Tice here, and of course, Dan Jadzinski, and Dr. Tully. So, I mean, our study, interpretation, and, you know, we have our new Conda STEAM Center here, and what you just described is all very much tied in.
Every single part of every single operation in the world will be affected by this. Museums are no different. And those were just two use cases, administrative and artistic. Interpretation will be affected. The way we forecast and budget will be affected, right? It is, we can talk about whether generative AI is good or bad, but that's not what I'm here to talk about, though I'd be delighted to talk about it if people want to. But everything will be affected. Museums aren't going to be separated from that.
Great. So let's take another step on this and talk a little bit about educational opportunities and outreach. You know, you and I have spoken in the past on historically, rightly or wrongly, TMA was viewed as maybe a bit stuffy and not necessarily always accessible for people who didn't come from a certain type of background.
Yep.
And I know that's been very much on your mind and with your plans, so share a little bit what you're doing.
Yeah, and look, I mean, the reality is that while I have particular points of view about this, they are actually just a continuation of points of view that the institution has felt for a long time. So part of the reason the museum is perceived as stuffy is because we built a 250,000 square foot Roman temple, right? So it's one of the great tensions of the early museum model in the United States. There were these civic engines for demonstrating that your city had made it, but also for elevating the population, hence that model where you walk up the grand staircase. You're literally separated from the profane into this secular, ancient temple, right? Temple to democracy, temple to all our civic virtues, right? This is a very like 19th century model. It also has a, like, shockingly, right, but you know, at the time, unobvious Eurocentric and colonialist dynamic to it. This is the house in which the whole world is brought together. Right? And this is the privilege of the ability to bring the whole world together, is building a house like this, because this reflects our values. That can be true. At the same time, museums can be fundamentally good and their impulses are good. We have to be able to live with tension and not have everything be good or bad. There are good things about the founding ethos of museums. There are bad things about the founding ethos of museums. We're free because we want to be for everyone, but we create a place that is unconsciously and unwittingly not as accessible to everyone. So we think about redressing that. And the museum has redressed it over the years. Compare that building with the Glass Pavilion, which I had nothing to do with. It was conceived of by Roger Berkowitz in the early 2000s, built by Don Bacigalupi, opens in 2006. We're gonna celebrate 20 years of the Glass Pavilion pretty soon. It's the size of a human. It's human scaled. It's in the Old West End, but it's sensitive to the height of the neighborhood around it. It's really nestled in its landscape. It's transparent. Like great art, it sounds like it's anticipating all of the societal conversations we've had in the past 20 years. Architecture is art. So the museum's been thinking about how do you create accessibility, transparency, human scale, easy access within a landscape that feels approachable. So we're just building off of that. So I think the signature thing that we've done in this plan, which is different, is we have taken a real focus on outreach within a 2-mile radius of the museum. And I want to explain why we've done that, because that is something, especially in a place like Findlay, which can easily be mischaracterized. It can sound like, oh, well, what are you doing for Findlay then? So the Toledo Museum of Art has visitors from all over the world. If you visit museums, you know how to visit museums, you're comfortable visiting museums, we don't need to, because we are a business, use discretionary effort to engage those who are already engaged. We need to use discretionary effort to engage those who are underengaged. And one of the great challenges of visiting art museums is transportation, right? It is. And yet, the 2-mile radius around the museum, which is diverse in every way except socioeconomically, is the most under-indexed in our visitation in the whole region. So we have more people as a percentage of Findlay's population visiting from Findlay than we do from 2 miles around the museum. And guess what? Transportation isn't really an issue within 2 miles. I mean, of course it's an issue. It's not, today's okay, right, even though it's rainy, but 2 days ago, we wouldn't have had a lot of people walking 2 miles to visit the museum. But over the course of a 12-month span, that's a much more manageable transportation feat within 2 miles. And yet, that's the most under-indexed cohort among our visitation. So what we've done is we've changed our outreach model, because in that geography, in addition to being equity-oriented and making sure that we are reaching all over the community, it's also an incredible research and development lab, right? If we can figure out models to increase visitation from the area that visits us least, those models, holding transportation constant, can be used anywhere. Findlay, Defiance, Bryan. So what we've done is we built a model where we employ full-time outreach educators. We hire them from the different neighborhoods. They show up in the neighborhood delivering off-site programming at the same location, at the same time, on the same day, every week. So everyone does outreach, but typically what we do is we parachute in, we take photos, we put it in our annual report, and maybe we show up again next year. Here we're developing real relationships. And what's happened is 22% of the Toledo, of the city of Toledo lives within a 2-mile radius of the museum. It was 7% of our visitation when we started this. Now it's 17% of our visitation. And statistics can lie. So you could say, well, actually, maybe the denominator is just going down. But our attendance every month is up 10 to 15% on the same month year prior, and has been ever since we've opened from COVID. So we are increasing our penetration in these neighborhoods and growing that faster. At the same time, we are growing our existing base. So we're growing all the way around. So it shows the model's working. So now, as we near the end of this strategy, we get to think, okay, how do we deploy these lessons learned in other areas? Because we are a regional museum, and it is our intent to use these same exact models in Findlay, in Defiance, in Bryan, in Sylvania. So 2-mile radius has been the focus, but I intend to be at the Toledo Museum of Art for a very long time. It's not about doing one thing and not the other. It's about doing the first thing in a sequence of things.
I'm about to open it up, so get your questions ready. Before I do that, I want to say we have the holidays. Well, we're already in the holiday season now. So if people are planning to bring family or friends up to the museum during the holidays and they have limited time, what are the 3 or 4 things that you say, oh, must see?
Absolutely. So if you were going to go at all during the holidays, the best time to go is between Christmas and New Year's for what is called the Great Art Escape, which is something that was inaugurated by my predecessor, Brian Kennedy. And it is basically a chock-a-block 4 days of programming that takes over the galleries. So if you were to go during the Great Art Escape, you could see everything from dance performances in the Great Gallery to we have this fantastic 17th century Dutch organ that only gets played a couple times a year during the Great Art Escape. So if you want to see a 17th century Dutch organ played, you can see that. The peristyle is activated, so every single space has programming almost continuously. So I would say do that. If you haven't been to the Toledo Museum of Art in a while or ever, you have to see a glass blowing demonstration. They're at 2 p.m. every day. They're terrific. They're always terrific, but we have an incredible team right now. We have a great glass studio manager in Alan Iwamura who's built this incredible international team of brilliant artists in their own right. So seeing them right now it's as good as it's ever been. And then the third artwork I would really encourage people to see, you kind of can't miss it, is 15, 16 foot tall sculpture by the artist Jeff Koons, which is in our Libbey court right now. It is made of rolled stainless steel, but it has been given a patina, a finish that is a mirrored magenta, and it looks like a giant balloon monkey. So it's called Balloon Monkey Magenta, very inventive name, I know. But it is incredible. I promise you, if you have grandkids or kids, they're gonna freak out when they see it. They will delight. It is a really incredible work of art. Imagine a balloon monkey that you get at sort of a carnival or a festival or fair blown up to be the entire size of that Libbey court. 16 feet tall, on loan to us through the end of the year from a collector in California.
Great, so everybody can put this on your to-do list, right? We're technically now in December, so.
I know, it's shocking. Where did it go?
But the Great Art Escape, again, runs from when to when?
The 27th, I think, the way the dates fall this year, until the 31st.
Great, there you go. So I have about 6 or 8 more questions, but I am going to open it up for, I know that several of you have questions as well. So right back here.
Hi, Adam.
Whatever you like, but hi, how are you?
Hi, I'm doing well. My name is Jess, and I work in equity in Title IX. I'm similar to you in the sense that I have a bit of an eclectic educational background. It's sort of non-linear when you look at it. So my undergrad is in history and theater, and then I have my MBA that I finished in July, so it's a quick turnaround for me. My question is, when getting into arts administration and on the museum side, how did you climb the ladder? Did you have sort of humble beginnings, starting off as administrative assistant? How did that look like when you take a step back and you think, I started with this position and then I worked all the way up to CPO?
Well, first of all, congratulations on getting your MBA.
Yeah.
All right, so there are 3 things that I will say. One personal, and then 2 maybe more general. And the caveat is, the worst vice is advice, right? So I try not to dispense advice, but take this with a grain of salt. So the answer for me is I have been remarkably lucky, and you have to get lucky. And part of that luck arises from my privilege, right? I get looks that other people don't get. I'm aware of that, and that is true. What is also true is, and I don't say this in a self-congratulatory way, I just think that it's an important thing to be honest about, because as a society we're not super honest about it. I work harder than anyone I know. And that's the only thing that you can control. You may get more or less lucky, but the only thing that you can control is how much you put in. So the sports I like are strength and endurance sports, because the more you put in, the more you get out, right? That is my mentality. No one will ever say that I am not a blunt force object, right? I mean, so this is, know yourself, but do more. And that is the way that you can accumulate things more quickly. And if you don't value that, that's okay too, but you don't get to then wonder why you're not in a particular place, right? You control how much you put in, right? You control whether you have 2 majors or 3. You control whether you have 2 jobs or 1 job. And that is a luxury that I was afforded because of my privilege, but I used every minute. What you can do is you can use every minute to add experiences. The other thing I would say is don't say no, right? Everything leads to something. Getting your foot in the door matters a lot. We will interview any internal candidate at the Toledo Museum of Art for anything. If you are a protective services agent, if you are a frontline guard, and you apply to be the director of learning and interpretation, you will get a first round interview. it doesn't matter if you're qualified, that's part of your professional development. But then once you go through that interview process, we know what your competencies are, what your interests are, and we will always look for someone who has demonstrated a level of commitment and interest in us first. So being in really matters. You also get the face time to be that really clever, really nice person that interacts with the CEO every day. So take opportunities and be very clear about what geographies you're willing to move to and not, and why. You know, I'm a native New Yorker. The Toledo Museum of Art in Toledo was not on the 5-year plan. When I was in Toledo, Jacksonville was not on the 5-year plan. And again, I'm very blessed, I'm very privileged, and I have a family that is supportive of that. I mean, I have like a fiance and a 10-year-old who are supportive of like doing crazy things, like going to, you know, Jacksonville and giving it a go and then boomeranging back 18 months later when the opportunity here presents itself. Not everyone can do that. But the reasons you can't do that are the constraints that you should articulate outright and work within, because the opportunities are not always exactly where you think they're going to be.
Great advice. Great. Question over here.
Yeah.
Speaking of outreach,
Yes.
have you considered the idea of once your plan for the 2-mile radius is working to your satisfaction, of creating some regional galleries, maybe in smaller cities an hour from that might have a university, something like that?
Yeah, so that's thank you for asking. Have we considered? Yes, we have considered. We haven't sort of built out models around it. Here's what I would say about that. I would say that you have great infrastructure here in the Mazza, in the Condeseem Center, in the Marathon Performing Arts Center. Not necessarily all to sort of museum display standard, TMA standards from a security and sort of conditioning perspective. The Mazza does, but Marathon Performing Arts Center, I don't know we could lend to, for example. With that said, the way more interesting opportunity for me is, or the way more interesting model for me, which is the thing that we are proving out through our existing outreach model, is it's actually about authentic partnership, not about sort of a almost imperialist model whereby the TMA sets up shop in Findlay, Tiffin, right? So the interesting thing is who's the partner on the ground that we can support to connect with TMA? And the truth is, and I've found people respond well to this, I hope this community does too, because you support the museum, you want every dollar to go to the highest impact, and we don't want peanut butter to be spread too thin. So we haven't given that much thought to who would the best partner in Findlay be, and what would that look like? Because we're laser focused on executing within this 2-mile radius and generalizing those lessons, not creating something which is so perfectly adapted to East Toledo that it couldn't work in Findlay. We're also really focused on, okay, what works there that could work here? But long story short, there are lots of ways to bring our collection on the road. It is something that we are actively talking about in general terms, but before we would do anything, invest in capital, build physical plant, repurpose a storefront here, we would always prefer to and would seek to partner with an institution that is already doing incredible work in this community, and there are many of them.
Thank you. Thanks. We'll take one more question. I thought I saw it. Okay, Dr. Tully.
Thank you. Ron Tully, Dean for Arts and Social Sciences. So this is a quick two-part. You're adjacent to the School of Arts, correct?
The University of Toledo's, yeah.
Right. One, I don't think I've been a member for 15 years. I don't think I really clearly understand the relationship between your institution and the School of Arts, or there is one, I would assume there's one. And I think you articulated kind of symbolically what the main museum and the glass museum present, maybe unintentionally to the community. What does that, at the time it was a celebrity artist, Frank Gehry, what does that articulate to the community?
Yeah, so I'll take the second one first. So at the time, this is the thing about Toledo, which is so remarkable, is at the time he wasn't, right? So Gehry becomes a star architect after that building, and that actually becomes a very important building in his oeuvre as he transitions from that sort of brutalist style to the more Baroque style we associate with the LA Philharmonic or the Sydney Philharmonic. So, we commissioned, that project is 1989 to 1992. We commissioned him, I think, in late 87. Gary's, by that point, a known architect, but he hasn't won the Pritzker Prize yet, which is sort of the Nobel Prize of Architecture. And Sana, who built the Glass Pavilion, also won the Pritzker Prize, which makes us one of only 2 art museums in the United States with 2 buildings by Pritzker Prize winners on our campus. So, et voila. So what does it symbolize? It symbolizes that the museum is willing, that building symbolized that the museum was willing to get out of its mode. That is not a building. I think the nearest thing to it that's been built is sort of the Wolf Center at BG and the Snøhetta building, right? Because it doesn't it's an incredible building that doesn't really fit with the BG campus, right? And not in a way which is critical of BG, but you see it and you're like, wow, what is this doing here? The Gary building actually created all sorts of space for contemporary artistic practice in the museum, even though it wasn't intended for the museum. We weren't buying contemporary art in that way then. I mean, we were buying contemporary art throughout our entire history. We just don't call it contemporary art now. We call it modernist art, right? Our Giorgio de Chirico, we bought 2 years after he painted it. Our Giorgio Morandi, we bought 2 years after he painted it. So all the stuff that you know and love, the Max Beckmann, we bought a few years after he painted it. All the things you know and love at our museum are great. And all the things you say, oh, I really wish they had more German Expressionism. It's because we weren't buying enough contemporary art. We should have been buying the German Expressionist paintings when they were making them, because the institution existed, right? So actually you miss the historic material is contemporary ones. But so that building really, I think, changed our approach to buying the art of the now and investing that much in a visible symbol of what was then very current. I think really sort of that was the real contribution in the museum. It was also conceived of, as you've articulated, as the Center for the Visual Arts, the University of Toledo's arts campus. And we signed a 99-year lease. And we're therefore about 30 years into the experiment. And I would say 30 years in, that experiment has not been as fully realized as it could be. Some of that, it's a partnership. So 50% of that's on the museum, 50% of that is on UT. What I would say right now is there is a lot of potential to educate through that program to prepare people for museum careers. There are museum studies degrees out there. They are not generally taught within a museum context. I will tell you, for anyone thinking about a museum studies degree, if I see someone who has a degree in museum studies, I actually move them to the bottom of the pile, because it means they're sort of going to come in with all sorts of ideas, none of which are actually tethered to the actual realities of working in an art museum. So there's a real opportunity for practice, experiential learning that we could leverage, because one of the macro trends in the museum world is the same as it was in America 150 years ago. If you're a nation that has new wealth, you build museums, private or public. And it's been that way since Japan in the 80s, then China and Russia, and now we're, having conversations about the Middle East, right? First it was Qatar and the UAE, and now there's Saudi Arabia. It's starting in India. We have big museums starting to open in India. India is going to dwarf everything that's been done thus far. People need to be trained in actual museum experience and how to run a museum. So there is huge opportunity there, but there are also headwinds in higher education, and administrators in higher ed need to prioritize how they're going to be sustainable and where they're going to find growth. And everyone here is reading the same headlines. Greg Postal is on our board. The University of Toledo is managing a difficult admission cycle, and they're going to have to make choices. And my job is to make available options, but I'm not in those I'm not in those rooms. So we'll see what decisions they make. But I think there is lots of opportunity to reframe and really leverage the museum if you're UT, rather than just have an adjacent art department that isn't necessarily invested in as a point of distinction for the university. The professors there are all great, but that doesn't mean they have great travel resources. It doesn't mean that they have resources for research fellows, et cetera. So it's not casting aspersions on the incredible team that's there to say the university hasn't invested in an incredible building adjacent to the Toledo Museum of Art as a center of excellence, but neither have we leveraged it for all it's worth.
So we are going to leave on that note. I feel as though we got a great appetizer sampling today in terms of a number of pieces that make up Toledo Museum of Art, broader study and engagement with the arts, and a look for the future. And we are so very, very appreciative of you sharing your time and these insights to us. So please join me in giving Adam a round of applause.
Thank you, everybody.
I also want to say he brought up and made it so clear, none of us could enjoy the arts that we do in Northwest Ohio without the support of the public. And I want to say a special thank you to our sponsors today, Premier Bank, because without Premier Bank, you all couldn't enjoy this wonderful series called Fridays at Finley. So I know Amy Hackenberg and several other folks from Premier are here. So thank you very much for your sponsorship. And of course, in this season of giving, I would not be the advancement person that I am without saying we so appreciate those of you who made a gift on Giving Tuesday. And if that day slipped by, you still have until December 31st to be able to make a gift and count it on this year's taxes. And University of Findlay, of course, as a private institution, we have enrollment and we have gifts to count on to be in support of this institution. So we very much thank you and appreciate any support that you have given or that you will be giving to our students here at University of Findlay. So with that, make it a great day. And am I missing any other announcements I am to make? And of course, I want to thank Doreen Bateson, who makes all good things happen with respect to the details of today. And one more round of applause for Adam Libbey.